This is Geek Gab with your host, Daddy Warpig. I am back. Geek Gab for Saturday, February 14th, 2026. And I just want to say to all the lovers out there whose lives are filled to bursting with excitement, I hate all of you. You suck. You're terrible people, and suffering is bound to come to you in due course. And it fills my heart with joy just to consider that. That's right, it's Valentine's Day, February 14th, the cursed holiday, wherein we consider that I'm just kidding. All of you having a great Valentine's Day. Congratulations. And also, even more congratulations for listening to this awesome show. We have two guests on the line today. We have Christopher Denote from Raconteur Press, and we also have Graham Bradley, an author whose book is, and I assure you this is completely a coincidence, whose book is published by Raconteur Press. I don't know how that happened. It was just magic. I just I scheduled two guests for today, and they just happen to work for the same company. I'm telling you, it is just a blessing. All the great things that happen on this show. So we're going to be talking about fossil force for today. Mechs that are more ancient than you would believe, and even more ancient than whatever it is you're thinking of. No, even more ancient than that. So we're going to start today with Christopher, who is only able to be here for a short time, and he wants to talk about the brand new boys fiction line from Raconteur Press. So, Mr. Editor, sir, feel free to take it away.
Thanks, DW. As always, it's a good to be here, and what a wonderful intro for Valentine's Day for all young teenage lovers and teenagers at heart. Still, I guess. So it's good to be here again, and I'm glad we could get Graham on too because this is one of our coolest titles I think we've put out so far. So the boys fiction line was started about a year ago or so, give or take, and it was and Cedar Sanderson, the wonderful Cedar Sanderson, author, artist extraordinaire, was the founding editor of that, and she really got this thing off the ground. And sort of the philosophy behind it, and I can speak to this as a parent too with a young son, is that having been to many scholastic book fairs and libraries and talking even to our older daughters, teachers, and all that, there's really become kind of a dearth, if you will, of good fiction being written for boys in the ages 8 to 18. And some people might want to dispute that. And, I think any tour around any still standing bookstore or like the sources I mentioned, a school book fair will kind of bear that out, So we're not putting out fiction that's alienating. We also think the girl readers, but that we're trying to serve what we believe is an underserved demographic right now, especially with realizing the fact that boys and girls often, very often, most often have different interests and different things speak to them, especially when they're young and working their way through childhood into adolescence and eventually adulthood. So we're trying to cover a lot of bases with it, everything from pirates to backyard building your own spaceship to um, becoming a knight. And I'm mentioning books if you go to our website by folks like Dave Freer, Chris Nuttall, Stanley Wheeler, um, the great British author Mallory, who's given us something that I think is a really cool and frankly better take on the ideas behind Stranger Things. But that's just me personally. And we've even dipped our toes now into historical fiction, something non-fantastical. There's one that just came out, A Boy Against the Boxers by Jacob Sharp, Army veteran, LEO guy, about the Boxer Rebellion and then Peking, China in 1900, about a boy and his family experiencing that. It comes across all sorts of real historical people and historical events. It's almost kind of like a secret history, because if you read up on that, the siege of the foreign legations there, the 55-day siege, it's almost too fantastical to believe. Just the fact that the Marines are involved, you're going to get mythology anyway. But beyond that, you're going to see that, hey, maybe we can come up with a few fun explanations for how some of these borderline fantastical things actually happened. So we're trying to cover a lot of bases with it. And Graham's book here, it's one of my particular favorites, because I'm not going to steal his thunder, but the first thing I thought of when Cedar and the team showed us the manuscript and all, was, oh wow, this reminds me of like really cool, fun Saturday morning cartoons. And I know that's not like the only thing that feeds into it, but that was my first reaction to it. So I'm super glad we got it. I'm super glad it's out, and I'm having a ton of fun now. Taking over, getting the reins from Cedar, because she got herself a promotion up to the board of the company. So I'm looking forward to continuing her legacy and the work she did, and also seeing where we can go next with this. And that's what I got. Over.
10-4. My calm then?
Yeah, feel free to jump in.
All right. So yeah, Fossil Force. Saturday morning cartoon is definitely a feeling that I was looking to tap into. I've talked before about how there were serialized books coming out in the 90s that I was a huge fan of. I was following Goosebumps in elementary school and Animorphs in middle school. And the main characters were always young kids that got way in over their head with something that an adult would have handled very differently. And usually there was a fantastic element to it. And with Animorphs, it was space aliens. With Goosebumps, it was fill in the blank spooky thing here. And that was just pure imagination fuel for me. And even when I started writing in like third grade, a lot of it was just fanfic of Goosebumps and other things that I was big into. I was big into Power Rangers. That was huge in the 90s. If you were in elementary school, like you were all about that. Ninja Turtles. There was just any one of these properties that had a completely gonzo idea, but they played it straight. They were as convincing with it as they needed to be, and kids could engage with it in a way that was almost tangible. George Lucas talked about that same quality with Star Wars, how the world needed to feel lived in. It had to be something that you could kind of almost role play with. There was, the toy line for Star Wars was famously huge and successful because everything that he made for the movies had what he called a toyetic quality to it. And I feel like the most successful books would have that kind of engaging element where a boy could read it and get lost in the world and then go daydream about it forever after that. He would feel like it was something that he could pick up and play with. It just happened to be in book form. So I took that ethos into it when I was doing some of the world building. Setting has a huge role in this, and then I started kind of developing the backstory, the whole deep earth bit, and the ancient mechs that they found, and I figured out, okay, what's the interface going to look like? How are they going to operate them if they're huge? What are the rules about them? What are the drawbacks of using them? They obviously want to keep it secret. Who else knows about it? There was a lot of questions that I got to ask myself in the development of it, but I always kind of had that as true north on my compass of like, this needs to feel fun, it needs to be colorful, and it needs to feel like the book version of something that a young boy would want to pick up and play with over and over again, because that's what got me into reading at that age. I wasn't reading classics or boring, dry, annoying stuff for school. I was having fun. That's all I cared about.
And when you were Mr. Christopher, when you were looking at acquiring books for the boys fiction line, what about Fossil Force appealed to you?
Just the idea itself, and one of the things that we try to do with the boys books in general is something that will something that's a bit edifying, but you don't realize it because you're enjoying yourself too much while you're doing it. And that was something that Cedar and the rest of the staff were really adamant about. And the way we do books is we do a 2-person integrity check when a manuscript comes in. We have 2 very different people read it, and basically kind of do a thumbs up, thumbs down. And so there's a lot of cool stuff in Graham's book, right? You got archaeology, you've got Native American history, paleontology, and you don't even realize you're getting taught something while you're reading it because you're just enjoying it too much. And I think that quality fits a lot of the books, if not all of them, all the ones that we've picked to date. So if there's an underlying theme, it's not educational on purpose, but if you pay attention, you're going to get something out of it while you're reading it. And I think that, as a parent, that definitely appeals to me too. And with Graham's book, it was just very cool stuff. I mean, I was a huge fan even when I was really young of the Indiana Jones books. It actually made me, the movies and the comics and everything that came out, it made me want to be an archaeologist until I kind of learned what that's really like most of the time. It's still cool, but not as cool as Indy. It's an experience, I guess. But that was a big part of it. But also from a personal standpoint, everybody dismisses those old cartoons as just like half-hour toy commercials. But that hides the fact that if you look at who some of those writers were, really experienced folks in comics and books, and going back to the the 60s and 70s, these folks knew what they were doing. Most of the time, toy commercial or not, there was good craftsmanship and good storytelling and great world building going on at the same time. So it made me think of an old cartoon called Robotics a little bit, right? Dino Riders. I mean, it was all. And look, I'm the king of like
Dino Riders. Yes,
I'm the king of like remembering short-lived cartoon series from the 80s and 90s that like had a single season, because the toy line didn't take off or something like that. So it's some of the useless knowledge I've acquired over the years is I've always been like, oh, cool, somebody finally did something with that, because it might have been an idea that like had not the best execution or just for whatever reason didn't click. So, with Graham, I mean, I kind of got the vibe of those 2 that I already mentioned, and Humanoids, if you remember that one, and that one was freaky, man. They used to show that in the same block of cartoons with like the Bigfoot cartoon or something like that. The monster.
I think I heard of Humanoids, but I don't know if I ever watched it. But yeah, Dino Riders for that short run, late 80s, early 90s was appointment television for me and my brothers. And we had the VHS of the pilot episode that we must have watched until it was half worn out. But that, that got us into dinosaurs as a kid. And we were buying, the little kid nonfiction dinosaur books and checking them out from the library. And, the spiritual fingerprints of that cartoon show up in Fossil Force when here's where I'm going to get a little bit into the world building of it if I can. So these kids find these ancient 9-foot tall humanoid looking mechs that they can remote control with these masks that they put on, and they're powered by different minerals and ores that they can find. They can absorb the energy from different basically rare earth minerals. But if they find fossils, there's a unique kind of energy that they can absorb in those, and it basically upgrades the armor in different ways. And there's a big fossil depository near this fictional town in southeast Utah that I made up. And the 4 kids, Steve, Howie, Patrick, and Tyler, they each get a particular fossil that they've integrated into their armor. But then they meet other operators that start coming to the town for various reasons. And, one of them, his armor uses a mammoth fossil print. And that was specifically because, like, as much as I loved the Dino Riders, they kind of capped off the series with an Ice Age episode where they did some time travel jiggery pokery just so that they could sell a toy line of, and these guys ride Ice Age animals. And there were the smaller Ice Age animals, and then the big one was the mammoth. And of course, we were never able to buy the big one. We got the little small dinky ones. But I've still got a computer desktop saved in one of my files here where it's like the original promo for that Ice Age Dino Riders toy line, and I've always loved the mammoth for that reason. And so when I was coming up with a list of prints to use for the other fossil, or for the other sentinels, that's what they're called, later in the book, I was like, I'm going to give this one a mammoth print, and I'm going to explain where he found it. It gets me looking up like, okay, where in the U.S. could you find this type of dinosaur or that type of ice age animal. If they're located in southeast Utah, what known fossils are there? You can't just say, well, it's a dinosaur book, so you got to have a T-Rex and a Triceratops and whatever. It's like I tried to stick to it a little bit more realistically. It's like, okay, well, you got to have a Torosaurus, you could have a Ceratosaurus, Stegosaurus. They found plenty of them there. Allosaurus. There's of course the Utah raptor, and then there are lesser known species. excuse me. That they can get hold of and use them to integrate into the armor for different features. If you find a flying dinosaur that can you can give your Sentinel some limited flight powers, things like that. But it's made more dynamic story-wise because there are also bad guys that have Sentinels and they come to town because they're looking for something specifically in the place where these guys live. And so that was an element of it. I didn't want the entire story to be about them walking around looking for different fossils to do cool things with. I worked it into the story. The story is really about like these boys becoming friends. They're given power before they're really old enough and mature enough to know how to use it. There are rules for how that power works, and they're kind of feeling it out and figuring it out, and there are consequences if they get it wrong. At the core of it, that's what the story's about, trying to do the right thing. Excuse me, sorry, I got something in my throat. And maybe even thinking that you're capable of doing the right thing until you have the power to do something bad, and then you get caught up in consequences with that. But I get to play with giant, ancient, mechanized robots that run on dinosaur power and get to punch each other in the face at full force and do cool stuff while I'm telling that story. Like you can tell a story with a moral to it, but you got to make it look cool or your 9-year-old isn't going to finish it. He's not going to care. He's got to learn that stuff in the background. You got to dress it up with something cool.
And you're definitely like a slightly younger generation than me, I think, too, because like there's elements of like you mentioned Power Rangers, some Japanese Sentai show themes in there, 5-man band kind of deal too. So it's recognizable, right? It's something that, and the thing is too is we've been talking about source material. This beats fan fiction because you can actually get paid for it.
Yep, scrub the serial numbers off. I had a loose outline of this idea for years, and then it didn't really start coming together until probably 2018, 2019 or so. I was living in Salt Lake at the time. I was still working as a truck driver then. The summer of 2018, I was working local, but I was still doing a lot of miles. We had one particular job where I was driving like out from Salt Lake out to just the boonies of northern Utah and back, running, shuttling these big heavy metal lid boxes with contaminated soil in them. And it took me to some really remote parts of Utah that I'd never been to before, that were still, small towns. They've got their own kind of isolated school districts. Some of them are near Indian reservations. And that just got the wheels turning in the back of my head. And I started envisioning the story with, a cluster of small town friends that get caught up in something local, and, wouldn't that be fun? And then other elements came into it later, got added in as I went. And finally, when Rack and Tour announced that they were looking for boys books, it's like, I've had this cooking on the back burner forever, but it's been sidelined with other projects that I'm doing. But if they're aggressively looking for this, that ups my chances that I'll get published. So I sat down and ironed out the details, figured out the setting, figured out the world building. I originally had a kind of a 5-man band, like you said. There were going to be 5 kids. It was going to be 3 boys and 2 girls, because you got to have a little bit of everything. And finally, I was like, why? Like I don't care. Like 13-year-old boys are all going to hang out with each other. That's what we're going to do. So I trimmed the number down so I could kind of just focus on those 4 characters. They've each got a particular strength. Steve, without saying, hey, I'm the leader, and the other guy saying, he's the leader, he's got leadership qualities and he kind of naturally falls into that role. Whereas Tyler's the comic relief, but he's got the ability to be serious when he needs to. He's not just always trying to be a jester, but he does lighten the mood. Howie's the smart kid. He's the homeschooled kid who reads a whole bunch of books. And then Patrick he's the new kid in town, and he's trying to figure out what's the thing that I'm going to be good at? What's my role in this? And he's trying to figure that out until finally one of the other characters points out, he's like, you're kind of our conscience. You're just a good kid. And, he figures out what that means, what that entails, and what the responsibilities of that are, because he kind of figures that out around the halfway point of the story. And then the 3rd act really starts with him taking one of those sentinels and doing something that he shouldn't have done with it, and there are consequences for it. But I was able to plug that kind of story into that setting because I'd had the setting on the back burner forever. But when I finally sat down and said, okay, what's Raconteur's requirements? What are they looking for? I can make this story fit that and still tell the story that I wanted to, but it will be, more robust and have more meaning, have more impact. And like I said, it's still dressed in all of the cool things that a young reader would like to fill his imagination with, but there's enough substance in there as well. To, like, you get to the end, you're like, okay, I get what this was about. Out of the couple of reviews that I've gotten on it, especially within the first month of it coming out or so, there's a guy on Substack, Jim McCoy, who read it and he put it on his best of year list. He's like, this kind of came out of nowhere. I picked up this book for, young boy readers, but it blew my mind. And I'm like, he loved it. I've gotten a word from a couple of grandmas that bought it for their grandsons, and she's like, no, he devoured this, and they don't normally read at this speed. My son read it, and weeks and months later, he'd still come up to me randomly and ask me something about the book or about the setting, and what are you going to do in the sequel? And I've caught him, looking over my shoulder while I'm working on the book. It's like, no, no spoilers, go away. Like the fact that they got into it, it's like, okay, frick, I actually managed to do, to some degree, the thing that I set out to do with this story is to make it look cool, but to have it matter at the same time. And if Raconteur hadn't been looking for this exact type of book, I wouldn't have had the chance to put it together and have it come together as well as it did. But those are some of the elements that all came together to make it happen.
I have to curse my memory here for a second because I had a really cool question I was going to ask right at the start of what you were saying. And I'm like, I'm not going to interrupt him. It's okay. I'm not going to interrupt him. And now we're at the end. And the question is just gone. It's been erased from my mind.
Sorry about that.
Well, no, you were saying stuff, and I'm like, that's awesome. And I was listening to what you were saying. I was interested in what you were saying, and so I just forgot my brain got wiped out.
Well, let me touch a little bit on something else that I wanted to mention that Chris said something earlier, and it reminded me of something else. I've mentioned this a couple of different times on other podcasts, but it's always worth sharing here. The goal that I have with my YouTube channel with Truckerman Reads is kind of the same that Raconteur is doing with the boys book line, is to get young boys to read more. I generally want more people to read, and to read broadly, but they're not going to do that unless they find a reason to be interested in it. Years ago, I was neck deep in the epic fantasy genre. It was pretty much all I would read. And my older brother, who has a PhD in political philosophy, he likes to read some of the most boring things imaginable. And he'd say, like, oh, you should check this out. It's a nonfiction about, the history of masonry and like how bricks are made. Here's a book about the history of salt. And I'm like, dude, I want to go to sleep just listening to you talk to me about this. There's no way that I would be interested in it. And then finally I read enough compelling fiction that I would come across a piece of nonfiction here or there, and I'd pick it up and I'd read it, and I would learn interesting factlets that would come together, about a subject a little bit more broadly. And, not only would I learn something from it, I'd also be like, I can use this in a book, as a writer, that's extremely valuable to me. But one point that I keep coming back to, this is one of my favorite books here, Education of a Wandering Man by Louis L'Amour. He always talks about how, people need to read, but you shouldn't, give them an assigned reading list the way that schools do. At first, it doesn't matter what they read, only that they read. They need to have a love for reading. I'm so sorry. And that'll start with whatever genres interest them. And as long as they love the act of reading first, they'll eventually drift into a broader and deeper and wider pool of things that they'll like. I was talking about this on my channel a little while ago. That's why I don't even necessarily come down too hard on the romantasy craze that's going on right now. I mean, let's make no mistake, it's pornography. There are women that are reading romantasy that don't really read anything else, but I was in that same place with just, vanilla epic fantasy 15, 20 years ago. if they do develop a love of reading, they'll eventually branch into other things that interest them, and they'll generally become edified by it. I'm doing a slow read this year of the Federalist Papers and doing blog posts about that, just because I finally took enough of an interest to get into like the nitty gritty legalese of the founding era of the country. And this is a perfect year to do it. But there was a time when I wouldn't have even cared, and until I got to the point where like I love reading so much, I'll give most things a try, especially nonfiction. But you got to start with something that you love first, and develop that into something broader.
I think you hit on something really important, Graham, too, is you have to learn to love the act of reading itself. I think that's what keeps it from becoming a chore. That's what keeps it from becoming, oh, I have to read. I really should read. It's no, I want to read because I enjoy it. I enjoy reading books to my kids. And I enjoy reading too. I mean, most of the time it's been either professional or school stuff, but I still try to carve out a little space for fiction. Usually that would be on an airplane ride. And what I think this is coming to, and because I've read a lot of the op-eds about men don't read fiction, what's wrong with men, why don't they like to read this? And the truth of the matter is I think what's getting lost in the conversation, I think men evaluate what we read differently than women to an extent. And what I mean by that is I think the way we're wired is we look at a book and we go, is there an ROI here? Like I have a friend who, boasts that she reads 120 books a year, and I'm sitting here going, that's great. I don't have the same type of time constraints or lack of that you do, but also I don't approach reading like that. Like I'm not going to just pick up a random book and start reading it. That's great. If you can do that and it edifies you and you get a ton out of it, then good, bully for you. But I don't think men as a rule approach that. I think we weigh things like how much work have I got? What are my obligations for all this other stuff I got to do? And so if I'm going to read something, if I'm going to put that time in that could honestly be spent probably in some other way, I want to be sure there's an ROI there for it, a good ROI. And it's not just like a utilitarian thing. It's hey, that's going to help. I think that's one why men tend to read more nonfiction. I honestly do.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, if anybody could feel free to chime in and argue with me on this, that's fine. I mean, if you disagree, that's cool. But I mean, I think that's part of the reason why. I also think it's when we do read fiction, I think we get really, 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 really hyper selective.
Yeah.
And I think there's two approaches to that. One, you either go all in on one thing. Like if you talk to the Galaxy's Edge guys, Nick and Jason and their fans, they devour that. And it's like they're so all into that. And there's plenty for them to work through, which is wonderful.
They know exactly what they want, and they maxed out on that one, and they found that audience, and they just keep giving them what they want.
Right. And, or, like myself, I tend to just really, really, really cherry pick. And I go all over the place. Like I really like reading older stuff. Like I don't have a problem plowing through 19th century novels, early 20th century weird fiction, or action adventure, and sort of that. That's a big part of what drew me to Raconteur Press. Was we're not like necessarily copycatting everything that came out back then, but we wanted to reinvigorate the spirit of it. And that's what the boys books does too, is the fact that there was, I mean, maybe we could call it a golden age. I don't know. But there was a point really, I think, between the 70s and into the 80s and 90s where you had a real explosion of stuff that was pretty good. I mean, Graham brought up Goosebumps, and I didn't read Animorphs. I was not the target demographic for that. I was reading more the boys fiction that I got introduced to through like Boys Life magazine.
Okay.
And it was serialized, oftentimes adapted into comic book form, like the old pocket illustrated classics were.
Yeah.
So that was sort of my introduction to that. So to this day, 3 of my top 3 favorite books of all time are still The Red Badge of Courage, Ivanhoe, and Treasure Island. Full stop, no doubt. I still kind of go back to them in a lot of ways when I look at archetypical things that I want to read or that I want to have around for my kids to enjoy. And I sort of in the grown-up version of that, I grew up to actually love Captain Blood by Raphael Sabatini and Zorro and all that other sort of things.
I got into as far as like older and what we would now call, classical authors about I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. I started picking up Washington Irving's short stories, and I actually read The Legend of Sleepy Hollow for the first time, and it blew my mind on multiple levels just because there were so many layers to the story, and the prose was beautiful. I didn't really have as much of an appreciation for just beautiful prose as I did until I picked that up. I was like, I want to read more from writers who have a voice like this. He captures the esprit de temps and the demeanor of a people in a specific era, and there's some American history to it. There's some Dutch and Germanic folklore tied up in there. There's a twist and a reveal. There's room for interpretation. It works very well as a discussion piece, and that got me into reading some more older pieces. I got into James Fenimore Cooper, who was a contemporary of Irving's, and then some 100 years after them, Edgar Rice Burroughs came along, and he blew everybody's mind with Tarzan and John Carter. And I've had varied experiences with reading those books, but I still love them generally. I've tried getting into Robert E. Howard a couple of times, and it wasn't until I think Spearman recommended Red Nails, and I read that one a couple of months ago, I want to say, and it was the first of like the Conan stories that I really enjoyed. A lot of writers that I love to read love Robert E. Howard, and so I figured I would just love his stuff as well. I like his Solomon Kane stories, but I just haven't been able to get into the Conan stories as much. But I understand, what he went on to influence that was then, there just when I was, up and coming as a reader and, a kid who was picking the things that I loved at a young age.
Well, it's funny because one of the greatest gifts I ever got was from an aunt, a great aunt who got me a box set of the first 6 Barsoom novels for a birthday present, and that really did it for me. I mean, she knew that I was into science fiction and stuff like that. She babysat enough, and she knew I was into Voltron and stuff like that. I was like, I mean, yeah, that was really it. That was the pipe. That was the crack pipe right there. To be honest with you. And like with respect to Howard, I was like, I just wanted to say, yeah, I'm actually a fan of his Bran MacMorn stories because I love the historical. That's a lot more sword and sandal than it is sword and sorcery in a lot of ways. So those are some of my the last King of the Picts against the Romans. I mean, so I just thought that was really cool.
I never heard of that.
Yeah, check them out, man. I mean, I think you'll dig it. But I hear what you're saying. It's like, there's one thing leads to another, right? And it's cool to discover it on your own and to discover because you do hit a point where you start wanting to know what other people's opinions are. And believe it or not, I mean, I worked in a library as a teenager. I got introduced to Lovecraft because there was a giant hardcover book of some of Lovecraft's stories, some of his lesser known ones, a bunch of letters, and a ton of critical essays on it. And I read that whole stupid thing cover to cover. So I was like reading literature criticism at like 15 years old,
That's a rare thing.
I like to argue with people, and that was a big part of it. I was a debate nerd. So what I saw were just arguments on paper, like you held up the Federalist Papers. I've actually been digging into the Anti-Federalist Papers.
Those are coming up next. Yeah.
There is a collection available, which is all of the historical stories, including Bran MacMorn and all of the other ones that aren't supernatural but are just straight historical stories in one book, in one volume. It's available on Amazon. So it's a bunch of.
Yeah, no, he did dip into some supernatural stuff with that. Like Worms of the Earth is a supernatural story with Bran MacMorn on it. It's one of my favorites too. It's super good. But you're right, Daddy. I mean, there's tons of historical characters that Howard wrote about, and as well, he had a character named El Borak,
Yes.
and things like that. And it's very much like Lawrence of Arabia and Indiana Jones and like what we come to think of now as 1930 pulp adventurers. You know what I mean? It's like the prototypes for all of that stuff. And and even on that note, we're actually started reading the Scarlet Pimpernel here too, and I think Baroness Orczy wrote the original Masked Hero. I think
Yeah,
Scarlet actually is the first one. So kudos, to her especially. But
I read that one.
Like 9 sequels to it, and short stories, and plays, and all sorts of crap that has the history of that whole family. Like, she wrote a literary empire about those characters.
I'm able to thank my wife for introducing me to a lot of classics that I've come to enjoy, because she and her sister, she's the oldest of 9 and grew up in a mostly girl house. I'm the middle of 4 and I grew up in a mostly boy house. And so, we're into the pulpy, colorful stuff, and she and her sisters were into the more, what's the right word? Like more developed and refined stuff. But there was that Scarlet Pimpernel movie from the 80s with I believe his name was Anthony Andrews, Jane Seymour, and Ian McKellen were also in it, and they just watched that a whole bunch of times growing up. And she introduced me to it, and I was like, this dude is basically like British Batman. He pretends to be a fop, and while he's secretly, wealthy, and he's fighting against the bad guys, fighting against the French uprising that's killing all the aristocrats, and he's smuggling them out of Europe, but he's throwing the detectives off his trail by pretending to be Christian Bale's Bruce Wayne, being a drunk public idiot, so that nobody would suspect that he's this guy. And I went on and I read Baroness Orczy's book. I only read the first one. I didn't know there were a whole bunch of sequels. The movie tells the story out of order from the book. Then there's a musical. I think Andrew Lloyd Webber did the music for that one. We went and saw that one several years ago. But she's helped me to kind of develop a taste for that. She's introduced me to a lot of Jane Austen stuff that I was kind of familiar with, but hadn't actually read before. And I wouldn't have had the patience for it, except that, again, I've been able to kind of slow down and read stuff that was maybe a little bit slower paced, but still there was a lot to draw from it. And, because of that, I've found some of these older books that have remained valuable. I just needed to kind of level myself up as a reader to get to the point where I could extract that value from them and understand what was really going on in them.
Well, did you see what we just did? We outlined how you go from reading our boys' books and the stuff that we like to do, becoming bigger, broader readers. So that defeats, I think, the stereotypes that are out there, but also hopefully gives people like sort of something to think about for how you start with, a lot of the stuff that, that you've done and that our other boys' books authors have done. And, and it allows the readers to grow out and grow up on their own a little bit with it, or, a little bit of guidance, a little bit of poking and prodding, left, right limits and what have you. But that's the way it is. I mean, and that's what we like to see, because, hey, we have a whole line of plenty of grown-up stories for once they hit that point of maturity.
Yep.
Shameless plug. So anyway, I just wanted to say, guys, thanks for having me on. I got to kind of bounce early, but Graham, it's all yours, and make us proud. You already are, so good to go there. And hope to see you all later. All right, take care.
Thanks, Chris.
Have a good day. Thanks for stopping by.
So all right, so yeah, that's a bit of how I got into reading at a young age, and how it's influenced what I write, and now how I get into more detailed nonfiction and stuff. He was talking a little bit about how men are selective about what they read because there's an ROI question. There's definitely an opportunity cost given, hey, we're all busy dudes. We've got day jobs, we've got families, we've got things to tackle, so that if we sit down to read something and spend the time on that, we really want it to be worth our while. Me being a trucker, I am behind the wheel a lot of the time. If I didn't have an Audible subscription and all the, the library apps, I wouldn't get it nearly as much reading done in a year. And I get people arguing with me, audiobooks don't count as reading. Like, pound sand. If I finish it and I can discuss it with you and I understand what was going on in it and I can extract things from it, then if I came through my ears or my eyeballs, I've read the book. But if I didn't have this job, if I had something else where I had to be, more mentally and manually engaged and I couldn't do it in the background, then yeah, I'd maybe read 24 books a year, and I'd have to be a lot more picky. Even now I've gotten to the point where I'm more selective with the things that I'll take time to listen to at work. If it doesn't interest me, then I'll punt on it and get into something that does. But with that, I've gotten into to longer and more detailed nonfiction that, again, it's given me insights into human behavior, the way people behave on an individual level and at a societal level, and things that I can work into a story later, maybe in subtle ways. Reading more has made me a better writer. I've always wanted to be a writer. I've always wanted to be published, and I was very, very aggressively pursuing it even from a young age, but I didn't have the experience to tell a story that people would really want to connect to and engage with and get passionate about. You can have the passion, but you've got to have the skill set to back it up. Otherwise, you're just somebody who really wants something. You're not somebody who's making something of value. With reading, you've got to enjoy the act of reading. With writing, you've got to enjoy the toil of writing. You can't just want the success of it. It's like anything else. If you really love to do it, you'll do it whether you get paid or not. I'd love to do it full time, but I got to find something more than the core of the dozen readers that I have right now. And that's kind of what got me off of the indie circuit and more into getting back on the query side of things. And when I started sending stuff to Rack and Tour, just so that I can, take the skill set that I've developed over the last couple of decades and say, okay, I can actually tell good stories now. And I'm still just as excited about it as I ever was. And I've got this whole, massive well of information and inspiration that I can draw on to make a story very full and robust, so that it's not just, character walks from point A to point B to point C, and this happens and that happens and whatever. Like, there's got to be a reason for it. There's got to be a meaning for it. So that if somebody sits down and reads it, they can take that meaning away from it and be like, okay, yeah, I got something of value and of substance. And the time that I spent reading this book was valuable to me. I was entertained. I was enlightened. I got something useful out of it. I'm cognizant of that because I have that experience now that I didn't have back in the mid 2000s when I was really trying to get published, to say, okay, if somebody's going to read my book, I've got to respect their time and really make it worth their while.
One of the things is that reading for enjoyment, reading for pleasure is a real thing that men used to do all the time. Even as late as the 1990s, Tom Clancy novels were massively popular among men.
Yeah, my dad would just sit there and burn through those big, thick Clancy novels. I mean, on a Tuesday night when work's done, he's just sitting on the couch. I remember through all my childhood and my teen years, he would read those big Clancy novels. And my brother, like I said, the PhD brother, he got into those in high school too. Like, he was always able to wrap his head around something more dense and detailed. Those stuff in those didn't interest me in those days, but yeah, I remember, especially in the 90s, it was Clancy and Crichton. Those were the books that dads read.
And then those were complicated books. I mean, they had a lot of technical details in them that were, they were not simple, quick, easy reads. I mean, they were thick and a lot of technical details. And then there were series like Deathlands that went on for like 180 books or something from the 80s well into the 90s. So as recently as the 90s, men were reading a lot, and they were reading just for pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And then into the 2000s, men, and these were general men. These were what people on the internet call normies. These were, a general audience. And then into the 2000s, that sort of dropped off and became more just genre fiction audiences, not general audiences.
Mm-hmm.
And then past like 2012, 2015 or so, that became more and more just indie people, and even the fantasy and science fiction crowd began reading really old stuff, like from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And the industry has been collapsing. Bookstores are going out of business. and men have just been walking away and not reading anymore. The industry, the big five, have been driving away their audience because they're publishing crap. They are publishing books that men don't want to read because, and this goes back to Christopher's point about ROI, they're not interesting. They're not pleasurable.
Yep. And there could be a whole host of ways in which they aren't interesting. I would have to look at a book and say, okay, well, I wouldn't read it because of this. I wouldn't read it because of that. I used to go to Barnes and Noble pretty regularly in my 20s, and I could find, like on every trip, I could find, even if it was a cheap paperback, something that I would buy sight unseen, or maybe it was by an author that I knew, but I hadn't read that particular title. I feel like it was generally easier to find that stuff, but yeah, after a while it kind of faded out. And I remember right around the mid 2010s, maybe late 2010s, it was common for me to have 3 or 4 books on pre-order on Amazon. A book would come up, it was somebody I knew or whatever, I'd just hit the pre-order button and wait for it to arrive. And then finally, I want to say it was around 2018 or 2019, I was like, I don't really have anything coming out this year that I'm excited about. There was one book, and it dropped in July of 2019, and I got it, and I kind of hated it. And it's been a few years since that happened. There was just this year, though, I do have 3 on pre-order that are coming out in. I've got one next month, and then one in May and one in June. 2 of them are from the same publisher. And it's a small kind of upstart publisher. The third one is I forget which one the third one is, but it's starting to come back, but it's not through the same avenues that it existed before. I think there's a whole host of reasons as to why. I think for a long time, entertainment institutions got generally interested in the same things ideologically, and those all basically aligned with a more exclusive audience. There wasn't really the broad general audience of readers that it applied to or appealed to. And then you still get echoes of that and fingerprints of that when you go to the big bookstores, when you go to a Barnes and Noble or what's the other one? Books A Million. There's few enough of them here and there, but you see the stuff that's in the vestibule and the stuff that's at the very front tables, and it's all Oprah's book club stuff, New York Times bestseller stuff, or catering to a very specific ideological or demographic audience. I don't feel like there's as much broad appeal for fiction. I do think, well, fiction and non, for books generally, I do think that part of that could be a consequence of Amazon's ability to divide anything into an extremely specific genre. You can't just say, show me your sci-fi books anymore. It's like, well, what kind of sci-fi are you talking about? And they'll break it down into a bajillion different, very specific categories. Raconteur figured that out, and they were, not hacking that or gaming that so much as just like understanding how it worked. And they would find a very specific category to put a book into. They weren't just trying to say this is a sci-fi anthology or this is a noir anthology. Like they found something specific to put it into. And then on launch day, they were able to get it up to, number 1 in their category. And that gave it visibility, that gave it sales acceleration and all of that stuff. That all happened online though. I don't know if you could just go to a regular bookstore and find any of Raconteur's anthologies or their novels on the shelf. You might not even be able to ask for it. I mean, it's pretty much all through Amazon. I think we're going to continue to see that to change. It'll be like the rubber band effect. You stretch something too far, and there'll be a snapback. Some bookstores are doing well. Some comic book stores are doing well. They have also diversified their catalogs and what they sell. If you walk into a Barnes and Noble, or if you walk into my local comic book store here in Oklahoma City, the books have kind of taken a back seat to other things that they sell alongside them. You get toys, and you get merch, and you get gimmicky stuff. A bookstore isn't just a bookstore anymore. But I think it's changing a little bit. But people are finding their way into what they're interested in. it might not be with the same mechanisms that existed when, you know, I was younger. It won't be a matter of like I can just walk into the bookstore and I can find books that I would want to read, you know, up front. I wouldn't have to go find some very specific category on the back of the bottom shelf, and you know, maybe they've got it in stock, or maybe I got to go get it online. I'm a little bit of a different case though, because I am a broad and general reader. I'll read romance, I'll read nonfiction, I'll read biography and history, I'll read books in Spanish, I'll read, you know, whatever. But I've gotten that way after a lifetime of reading, and because of the job that I have, that gives me time to read things that I otherwise normally wouldn't. It's a hydra. It's a multi-headed monster. There are a bunch of different reasons why, but I do think that the hyper narrowing of the focus and like I said before, the hyper, what am I trying to say here? Like the fact that all the entertainment institutions, whether it was, you know, gaming, cinema, music, or literature, kind of all focused ideologically on one side of the spectrum, and those on the other side had to go start, you know, looking for things that would be worth their time in other avenues.
The thing that men like in books is action and adventure stories.
Yeah. I like things that move. The things have got to be happening. It's got to be explosive. It's got to be cool. You know, we want that. We want the adrenaline.
And they don't have to be gunfights every page, because men were really into like Dashiell Hammett stories and John D. MacDonald stories, where it was the tension, and it was but things were still happening. The plot was still moving forward. It was not super long sections of description and things not happening.
Yeah.
And so those kinds of stories, what they require is very masculine qualities to deal with the challenges. They require daring, they require courage, they require
grit, endurance. Yeah. You know, the ability to take a punch and say, you know, okay, well, I've got to keep doing this.
And it is those qualities which are ideologically despised by this you know, group that has taken over all the mainstream entertainment. And because those specific qualities were despised by them, they're not writing stories that feature them. And honestly, the authors that they tend to favor are females, and who don't naturally tend to write those stories anyway, because they're written from a male point of view.
Yeah, there was what was his name? Thomas Umstattd. He writes, or he manages a novel marketing podcast. I haven't listened to it in a while, but he's had some really good episodes over the years. And there was one that I listened to back in like late 24, and it stuck in my head ever since. I did a video or two on it on my channel where he talks about how women are interested in people and men are interested in things. And once you understand that distinction, I think it makes a lot of, you know, what's happened in literature over the last 10 or 15 years. It makes sense of it, because, you know, when you get a a group of editors and a group of agents and a group of publishers and a group of proofreaders and gatekeepers, effectively, that are all on the female side of the equation. They're going to have less interest in letting things through that would appeal to the male audience. I think that's got a lot to do with how we got here. Men will fixate on details and mechanisms and processes and stuff, but a woman will want to sit down and read more about relationship dynamics and what a female character is thinking about and stuff. Once you see that, it's kind of hard to unsee it. My personal eureka moment on this was we were watching the Transformers 1 movie, the animated movie from 2024, with my kids, and my wife was sitting on the couch, and it starts out with Optimus Prime and Megatron. They had different names, and they were best buds, and they were coworkers on Cybertron before they ascended and got new powers and became the leaders of these rival factions. And my wife turns to me and she goes, why do all of these stories start where like these serious enemies were once friends? And I'm like, because it's made for men, and it's the opposite of a female romance, where it's most romance novels are enemies to lovers, whereas most male stories were like, oh, you were my brother, but now I must fight you. And I'm like, it's Anakin and Obi-Wan, all right? It's Captain America and Iron Man, it's Optimus and Megatron. And it's like you see this this opposite dynamic with male-centric stories versus female-centric romance. They want the enemies to lovers thing to happen. They're interested in peace, whereas men are interested in conflict. You want to see them these two guys that will convince themselves that they're so right about something that they're so divided over that they'll go to blows over it. They don't care about who's actually right. They care about beating the other guy up to prove that they're right. Like that's very deeply biological to men, whereas women want to have the two people that don't like each other at first, but then they bond over something and they fall in love, and there you have it. I would suggest that mainstream media is starting to figure that out, and they have over the last couple of years. And whatever we want to say about like the box office that's going on with movies and whatnot, I think they're starting to kind of retreat from the territory that they were claiming in the early 2020s. I think about the movie Twisters, which it's one of those 30-year sequels that nobody asked for, but I went and saw it, and I'm like, this was a very good dumb movie. And it was definitely aimed at boosting the main female character, and it has that whole like enemies to lovers romance dynamic in it. But if you watch it, like, really the main character is Glenn Powell's character. He's the one that, like, the movie really starts when he arrives. Like, yeah, there's the whole bit with like, oh, the woman was trying to do a science project and it went wrong, but then he comes along and tells her that she can do it and blah blah blah. And it's like this dude's just an alpha male, kind of goofy golden retriever character who does cool masculine stuff. He drives into a tornado with a pickup truck and shoots fireworks into it for his YouTube channel. Like, he's just a bro, and like he gets her life back on track, and helps her get her mojo back, and basically, like, saves the story for her. We're seeing more movies that are doing that. They're not so concerned about, like, the constant affirmation of the feminine psyche, as it were. It's more like, let's get back to adventure. Let's have cool people on screen that we could like, that are doing fun stuff, and give him that shot of adrenaline that the male audience is looking for, and give him a little bit of Twitter pated heart fluttering feelings that the women are looking for. And if we do that, we can appeal to a broader audience and kind of right the ship in American entertainment. I don't have the kind of budget to go make a movie, but I can definitely do that with my books. Let's have characters that are generally trying to do the right thing in the right way. They might screw up along the way. They might have to learn some hard lessons, and we'll take some cool world building elements and put them in there as backdrop, so that if there's not immediate action on the page, there's still something to intrigue the reader, to get them to keep turning the page until the action needs to happen for the sake of pacing. And if you do that enough, get the characters to the end of the story, then you'll have what I've talked about through this whole chat here, and that's that you'll have that experience where the reader puts the book down and says, like, I got something out of that, and I can keep thinking about that and keep thinking positively about it. And I'll probably go back and read it again sometime. That's what I can do as an independent author, as a small press author. Learn from entertainment broadly, and if the entertainment industry is still not going to appeal broadly, well then I'll do what I can to kind of fill that gap, and they'll figure it out along the way, I guess.
All right. Well, it is about that time. I've got one more thing I want to talk about.
Okay.
That is, but that's just going to be me talking about something. It's a little bit off topic. You can stay if you want to hear me talking about something for a little bit, but I want to thank you for coming on and talking about your book. It's been out now for about a month, and I have the URL for the book right here because I was like all prepared and stuff, which I understand isn't always, our usual want here on the Gab, but I was prepared and stuff. So I'm going to drop that link into the chat. And then I'm going to put it into the description of the show. Graham Bradley's Fossil Force right there. And then, anyways, I here's what I thought, honestly, when I heard about the concept of your book. I was the network, the distribution system of publishing and stuff we've got now is so messed up. All the major distributors don't sell good stuff, and all the publishers that are selling good stuff right now don't have a reach yet to where large audiences even become aware of books like this. And I felt regret that more people wouldn't find out about and read this book. That was my honest reaction as soon as I heard about it. I thought it was a fun concept. I thought it was a neat concept. And I felt like more people needed to be exposed to it so it could find a larger audience. I thought that it was something that deserves to have some sort of, filmic or cinematic treatment. It deserved to be generally bigger than what our distribution networks right now are going to allow it to be. So obviously that's not good or bad. That was my initial reaction on hearing the concept for the book.
Well, I'm glad that you had that reaction to it. That's pretty affirming. I've gotten used to not having the exposure that I want, just because as an indie, that's you kind of have to not care so much about that. Like I've said before, like you've got to love the process enough of creating and sharing these things that you do it anyway. That's why I was kind of glad to find Raconteur and the fact that they wanted to make books in this vein. And I was like, well, cool. They've probably got some kind of marketing apparatus or a mailing list and stuff. And, they've got readers that they can reach with it. I've gotten comfortable with the fact that right now, where I'm at in my career as a writer, I'm going to have limited exposure, and it's kind of hard to break containment. I don't know all that much about marketing. I do need to put myself out there more. Going on shows like this is always a big help. I went on to Michael Finney's show right around the time that the book launched, and I was just interacting with the guys at the Dadlit podcast on Twitter earlier today. I'll be on theirs probably in the next couple of weeks. Big shout out to Hans Schantz, who's always doing these, he calls them based book sales, and he'll get a bunch of indie authors like me together who have books constantly on the list on Amazon, that they'll discount them to 99 cents or free for a couple of days. One of them is going on right now. I'll try to find that and drop that link in the chat. Although I see Sam Robb is in there, maybe he can find it. He's usually got an ear to the ground on that. I picked one up just this week. It was a funny kind of like Al Gore time travel story where Al Gore becomes president and he's got this time machine and he tries to go back and fix something, but it screws up and he's got to hit the button and reset it and do it again and do it again. Like, the book was only about 100 pages and the concept sounded goofy enough that I was like, okay, this is probably going to be fun. And if it's 100 pages, there's the whole opportunity cost thing. Like, 100 pages is plenty of time to give me some space in a somewhat ridiculous concept and have just enough fun with it before it would become too tiresome. And 99 cents is a great price point to pick up something like that and read it. The only way that we are going to break containment as small press or indie authors is by finding people who will read our books and we'll talk about them. And that's just going to be the result of our own word of mouth. Obviously you wouldn't want to just walk up to random people at the grocery store and be like, hey, I bought a book, you should go read it. But if you wrote something, talk about it. If you read something great, talk about it. We say until we're blue in the face as indie writers, like, reviews and word of mouth are a huge help for us. If you loved something, share it with people. That's why I run the Trucker Man Reads YouTube channel. I've got a Substack that complements that. And, I'm always talking to people about books. And even if I've got friends that don't read really all that often, I'll ask them, like, have you read anything good lately? What are you into? I can probably recommend something that you'd like. The best thing that we can do is just keep doing what we can to boost the signal. We don't all have an advertising budget. And heck, if I could even figure out the Amazon algorithm for that stuff anyway, best we can do is talk, meet people, find something you're excited about, share it with them. Chris reached out to me yesterday, said, hey, you want to be on Daddy Warpig's YouTube channel? I was like, shoot, I'd love that. I'd love to talk about my book. And, if by the time I die in 60 years, only another 100 people have read it, so be it. I made it and I put it out there. And what does the saying go? The great American novel has already been written and rejected. I try not to focus too much on the tragedy side of things, that, we're all of us as creatives, we're putting things out there and some of the best work might not ever get eyes on it. And unfortunately that's the way it goes, but that's not going to stop me. If I've been at this since I was 8 years old and nothing else is going to stop me, that sure isn't going to do the trick. I'm just going to keep going. But I appreciate that you looked at it and had that response to it. I'm hoping that the people who will watch this will go check it out. It's a short enough book. It's under 50,000 words. Cedar Sanderson did some excellent illustrations for it. I'm also an illustrator, but she's the in-house talent for that at Rack and Tour. And she read the book and got the descriptions of the Sentinels from that. And I sent her a couple of thumbnails that I'd been working on from my sketchbook. And then when I finally got the book and I saw what she'd made of that, I was like, I wouldn't have rendered them that way. Like, that's not the way that I saw them in my head, but I really liked her interpretation of it. And even looking at some of the variants that she did for the cover art, like especially for the one that you had on the thumbnail for this video, it's got me thinking of stuff that I'm going to put into the sequels. I'm working on books 2 and 3 right now. I'm going to finish them kind of back to back. And there's a couple of things that she's put in the artwork that made me think, like, there's nothing in the book that looks like that, but there could be, and I can make it work for the story. So I'm just going to keep doing it, and one by one, I'll find readers who like what I do, and I'll keep putting stuff in front of them as long as they'll keep reading it.
All right. Well, we are out of time for today, so I'm going to thank everybody for. I'm going to thank all the people who tuned in live, and I'm going to thank all the people who tuned in later. Thank Christopher and thank Graham for coming and dropping by the show. Oh, we have the author of An Inconvenient Presidency in the chat, listening to the show. That's the Al Gore
That's the Al Gore
book.
book. Yes, there we go.
An Inconvenient Presidency,
Yes.
which I am sure is available on Amazon, probably for 99 cents right now. Let me see. An Inconvenient Presidency, the time travel misadventures of Al Gore. And I tell you what, I am going to, because I am quick-witted and quick-fingered, I'm going to drop the link to that in the chat right now so people can see that and check it out. And I also have the link to Fossil Force in the chat and a link to the Bran Mac Morn and El Borak and Other Desert Adventures Robert E. Howard books are also in the chat for people who want to check those out if any of those sounded interesting. So this is how awesome I am. I'm here, I'm doing this chat, I'm hosting the show all by myself. I don't even have Jamie to talk to say, hey, Jamie, can we get the link to that in the chat? No, I have to do it myself. And all of those are right there, timely, while I'm talking, extemporizing off the top of my monumental brain. I find it and drop the link right there to the Amazon page so that you, my audience, can benefit from the awesomeness of these books, so that instead of reading modern crap, you can read awesome books. And of course, I'm going to include the link to Graham Bradley's book in the description of the show, but just so you can benefit from that sooner, I will also drop that into the chat right now. And there it is, folks. Okay. This has been Geek Gab for Saturday, February 14th, 2026. I'm your host, of course, Daddy Warpig. We are signing out for today, but I want to thank everyone who tuned in live and participated in the chat. I want to thank everyone who will tune in later and catch us on all the other places we are. And we are here just about every week. YouTube.com/GeekGab. Once again, that's YouTube.com/GeekGab. We are signing out for today, folks. But don't you worry. Don't you fret. We will be back.
Thanks for having me. Drive safe. See you out there.